Coffee time. Let's get into it.
Who's gonna run federal student loans?
So the Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today. As you know, the President's executive order directed Linda McMahon to greatly minimize the agency. So when it comes to student loans and Pell Grants, those will still be run out of the Department of Education, but we don't need to be spending more than $3 trillion over the course of a few decades on a department that's clearly failing in its initial intention to educate our students.
So is the federal government going to be spending less?
Much smaller than it is. Is it not going to be shut down completely? And then I have a second question.
As I said, Pell Grants and student loans will still be run out of the department in Washington, D.C., but the great responsibility of educating our nation's students will return to the states.
So the great responsibility of education of our students will return to the states. I'm sorry, what the does that have to do with the Department of Education? You guys make this just too easy to fact check. All right, this comes from the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. That's just mean. Don't do that to your kids, folks. Public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade or K through 12 are financed through a combination of local, state, and federal dollars in proportions that vary across and within states. Now, here's the most important part. State and local governments provide the vast majority of funding for K through 12 education. 86% of all school funding. As you can see here, the federal government, the Department of Education and federal government were responsible for 14%. This comes from the U.S. Department of Education itself. Education is primarily a state and local responsibility in the United States. It is states and communities, as well as public and private organizations of all kinds, that establish schools and colleges, develop curricula, and determine requirements for enrollment and graduation. The structure of education finance in America reflects this predominant state and local role. Of an estimated $1.5 trillion being spent nationwide in education at all levels for school year 2012 through 2013, a substantial majority will come from state, local, and private sources. So 14% of all funding for education comes from the federal government. What does that 14% cover? So what does the Department of Education actually fund? This is where things get, shall we say, interesting and probably a little telling. This comes from Time Magazine, which I get some of you aren't going to appreciate. The Department of Education has many different and varied responsibilities under its current formation and governs many officials, including the FAFSA, the Federal Student Aid, Institute of Education and Sciences, Office for Civil Rights, and the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. Now, this is important because Mussolini's Barbie here just said that they weren't going to mess with people who deal with these student loans and Pell Grants. So if that's off the table, then what else is on the table? The department provides 13.6% of funding for public K-12 education, according to the Education Data Initiative, sending funding streams that include Title I, which describes federal allocation of supplemental financial assistance to schools and districts with a high percentage of children from low-income families, as well as grants under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, providing money to districts to serve and teach students with disabilities, and grants for things like adult rehabilitation services. This is what they're going after when they're talking about the Department of Education. They're not trying to make things more efficient. They're trying to underfund and take away responsibilities of the government from actually helping students who need it. Underprivileged, low-income families. It is a fact that per capita, the minority and marginalized groups of this country are far more disproportionately affected by poverty, lower income, etc. So they're taking funding away from the impoverished areas. Furthermore, they're also taking away funding from kids with special needs. Remember, leave it specifically excluded federal Pell Grants and loans. They're going after Title I, they're going after IDEA. The vast majority of schools that get these monies need them for, again, helping with impoverished areas, helping with kids with special needs. That's going to be forced statewide now. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that states are just going to get rid of these programs? Or in order to cover these programs, do you think that your property taxes are going to go up? Because that's one of the things that property taxes goes towards is education. But the two glaring choices that we seem to have are A, we get rid of the programs, or B, we raise property taxes. Now, here's the problem with both of those. If we raise property taxes, those places that are impoverished, they can't really afford the cost of living as it is. So we're going to limit the ability of people who are trying to get themselves out of poverty by making it even more expensive to own homes, to own wealth. Or we're going to get rid of these programs altogether. And what do you think is going to happen to education then? Especially those marginalized groups that are far more affected by poverty and those who have special needs. Make it make sense, people. Anyway, I'm Johnny O. You can buy me a coffee if you want over there. That's fine. If not, like, share, subscribe. Do those things. We'll see you next time.